We're yelling at each other. We found out what the Holts do. Carson? Yeah, but what did they do that we thought the man in black did? Noah? And they did the explosion at the museum too. Because that was Hamilton's idea. All right. Stop yelling, Mary Todd yelled. Children, we can't keep arguing with each other. It hurts team morale. Your mother is right, Eisenhower said. The fire at the mansion and the museum bomb were both bad ideas. We should have pulverized the Cahill brats in person. Arnold barked excitedly and tried to bite Eisenhower's nose. Reagan knit her eyebrows. Again, we're not drawing on each other or anything like that. We're just listening, calm and cool and collected. Reagan knit her eyebrows. She shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. But, Dad? Problem again? Well, the explosion. I mean, it could have killed him, right? Masson rolled her eyes. Oh, here we go again. You're going soft, Reagan. Reagan's face turned bright red. I'm not. R2. Quiet, Eisenhower bellowed. Now look, everybody. If we're going to win, we're going to have to take some drastic measures to win this contest. I can't have anybody going soft. Understood? Did you guys catch that Reagan actually cared that she didn't want them to die? Yeah, Reagan, the daughter, she didn't want them to die. But the other Holts, do they care if they die or not? They don't care if the Amy and Dan die. Reagan has a little bit of feeling in her, right? She seems to care a little bit, but they say she's going soft if she actually cares. He glared at Reagan, who stared glumly at the floor. Yes, sir. We know Amy and Dan were Grace's favorites, Eisenhower continued. Old McIntyre is probably giving them inside information. Now, they beat us inside the Lucian stronghold while we were trying to do surveillance, which was also a bad idea. Are we going to tolerate any more bad ideas? No, sir, the kid shouted. They think we're not clever, Eisenhower said. They think all we can do is flex our muscles. Well, they're about to find out we can do more than that. Eisenhower flexed his muscles. Teamwork, Mary Todd cried. Right, children? Yes, sir, teamwork. Arf, Arnold said. No, Eisenhower said. We have to get that book. We have to assume those brats have it, or else they know what's in it. We need to get to the Isle St. Louis without driving the ice cream van into the river. Who's with me? The kids and Mary Todd cheered. Then they remembered the ice cream and the kids went back to strangling each other. Eisenhower grunted. He decided he'd let them wrestle for a while. Maybe he'd built character. All his life, people laughed behind Eisenhower's back. They laughed when he flunked out of West Point. They laughed when he failed the entrance exam for the FBI. They even laughed at the time he was working as a security guard where he chased a shoplifter and accidentally tasered himself in the rear end. A simple mistake. Anyone could have made it. Once he won this contest, he would become the most powerful Cahill of all time. No one would ever laugh at him again. He pounded his fist into the van's cash register. Those Cahill kids were starting to get on his nerves. They are much too like their parents, Arthur and Hope. Eisenhower had known them all too well. He had an old score to settle with the Cahills. Soon, Amy and Dan Cahill would pay. Chapter 14. Amy was all in favor of rushing to the Isle St. Louis, but her stomach had other ideas. They passed a boulangerie, which must have meant bakery, judging by the yummy smells, and Dan and she exchanged looks. Just one stop, they said together. A few minutes later, they were sitting on the quay of the river, sharing the best meal they'd ever had. It was only a loaf of bread, but Amy had never tasted anything so good. See that? Amy pointed at the top of the nearby church, where the black iron spike rose from the bell tower. Lightning rod. Dan said his mouth full. The French were the first ones to test Franklin's theories about lightning rods. A lot of the buildings still have the original Franklin models. Dan said enthusiastically, but Amy wasn't sure whether he liked the story or the bread. The sun was going down behind the bulkhead of black clouds. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but the Parisians didn't seem too concerned. Joggers and skaters crowded the riverside. A sightseeing boat loaded of tourists hummed along the scene. Amy tried to use the Starling cell phone to call Nellie, but the phone was dead. Apparently, it wasn't set up to get a signal in France. Her nerves were still buzzing from the raid on the Lucian stronghold. Despite all the security, it still seemed like they'd gotten in and out pretty easily, and she wasn't sure why. She didn't like the stuff Dan had taken, the Franklin battery and that weird metal sphere. She knew better than to argue with him about it, though. Once he got his hands on something, he hardly ever let it go. She wondered how Rena Spassky had gotten the book from Uncle Alistair and why she would be interested in the Alice St. Louis. It felt like a trap, but it was Amy's only lead, or at least the only lead she wanted to think about. Her mother's note in the Poor Richard's Almanac, The Maze of Bones, still gave her the chills. She tried to imagine what her mother or Grace would do in her place. They would be braver. They would see what to do more clearly. Her mother had once searched for the same clues. Amy was sure of that now. Grace had intended Amy to take up the challenge, but what if Amy wasn't up to it? So far, she felt like she'd done a terrible job. Every time she needed to speak up, she failed. The other teams probably thought she was a mumbling loser. If it wasn't for Dan, she would have been lost. Just thinking about it made a lump in her throat. After finishing the bread, Amy knew they needed to get moving. She stared at the darkening sky and tried to remember the details from her Paris guidebooks. There aren't any metro lines to Isle St. Louis, she said. We'll have to walk. Let's do it. Dan hopped to his feet. Amy couldn't believe how quickly his spirits rebounded. A few minutes ago, he'd been complaining about his feet and his heavy backpack. Now a hunk of bread later, and he's good as new. Amy wished she was like that. She felt like lying down and sleeping for a century, but she wasn't going to tell that to Dan. It was full dark by the time they got to the Pont Louis Philippe. The old stone bridge was lined with street lamps that glowed against the water. On the opposite side rose a cluster of trees and mansions, the Isle St. Louis. To the north was a larger island with a huge cathedral lit up on the yellow in the light. That's the Ile de la Cité over there, Amy said as they walked across, mostly trying to keep herself calm. And that's the Notre Dame Cathedral. Cool, Dan said. Do you think we can see the hunchback? Maybe later. Amy decided not to tell them that the hunchback in Notre Dame was just a character in a book. Anyway, the smaller island we're going to, the Isle St. Louis, the tour books hardly said anything about it. Mostly old houses and shops and stuff. I don't know why Irina would be looking there. No Ben Franklin history? Amy shook her head. It used to be called the Island of the Cows, because that's all that lived there. Then they turned it into a neighborhood. Cows, Dan said. Exciting. After the other parts of Paris they'd seen, the Isle St. Louis felt like a ghost town. The narrow streets were lined with elegant old apartments, 5 stories tall with black gabled roofs. Most of the windows were dark. A lot of shops were closed. Street lamps cast weird shadows through branches of the trees, making monster shapes on the walls. Amy was too old to believe in monsters, but the shadows made her still made her uneasy. An elderly couple crossed the street in front of them. Amy wondered if it was her imagination or if the couple really glanced at her suspiciously before they disappeared into an alleyway. On the next block, a guy in a beret was walking a Labrador retriever. He smiled as he passed Amy and Dan, but his expression reminded Amy of Ian Cabra, like he knew a secret. You're just getting paranoid, she told herself. Or was it possible there were other people seeking the clues? People that weren't even part of the 7 teams? She glanced at Dan, but decided not to say anything about this. Not yet. The contest was already overwhelming enough. Another 100 yards, and they found the Rue des Jardins. It was narrower than the streets around it, with crumbling stone buildings that might have stood there for centuries. Amy counted the street numbers. She stopped abruptly. Dan? 23 Rue des Jardins? Are you sure? Yeah, why? Amy pointed. There was no building at 23 Rue des Jardins. Instead, ringed at the rusty iron fence was a tiny cemetery. I say we're not spending our time getting the people distracted, are we? Okay, that's where we stop.